Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are on YouTube, you see a little link down below. You can click on it, and you'll end up in Zoom, where you have another link down below, and you can click on that, and you'll end up in Mokana. From there, you can ask questions and chat with other folks and trade notes during the show. If you are watching this, you are the producer. You're the one deciding what we talk about. If you're in the audience, it's not just sitting there hanging out. There really is an opportunity for you to ask questions, vote on those questions, and that's what we're going to talk about. The first hour is general questions. Second hour is something that we think is something we want to focus on for that day. Today, we're going to talk about isolating audio. Now, if you think that you have the answers for some of these questions, come back tomorrow. Come a little early. 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time is when we do mic checks. You need to be here by then to be on the panel. We open at 6, so if you want to come in early and check your kit and see if things are working out well, go ahead and come in early. Today, again, as I said, we're doing audio isolation. Tomorrow is the last day of the office hours year. Like last day. So it's like December 31st, except for us it's March 24th. And so anyway, I think we'll just start, we'll start the office hours. January starts on Thursday anyway. So it's our last day of one whole year, 365 times we've done this straight. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. Thursday we have Chris Meyer. He does a lot of things. Chris is a very a Renaissance man. So, but I learned After Effects from him and his wife Trish, but he's doing modular. He's really into modular synths, and he's going to talk about the business, talk about the industry, talk about what it takes and what it's like, and so that'll be on Thursday. Friday, of course, we're doing part 3 of AWS, and the first 2 have been killer, so I think we're going to have a lot of fun connecting stuff up. And then Saturday, of course, is the long day. We'll have education to start with, and then we'll have resolve at 10 a.m. And then at 11:30, we're going to all jump into another platform just to see what it looks like. We're going to start testing platforms more often as we move forward. So there we go. Bill, take it away.
TJ Asher starts us off. We actually have really interesting questions. I think this is going to be a good discussion this morning. TJ wants to talk about Zoom's announcement of the video software development kit and how it's going to affect things like Zoom OSC. And will this finally get people the clean Zoom feed they've been craving? He has a big link to it there. And he also notes at the bottom that Andy Carluccio, our friend who develops Zoom OSC, has made some comments about this in Mokana, which are very interesting. So if you want more information, you can check that out.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Clean Zoom feed would be cool, but would be also cool to get conf, please. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Very good. And then you cut away, and now I lost my gallery. All right. I thought I had handed that off. I was so ahead. I was all warmed up, and I usually try to hand that off at the beginning. And anyway, I think it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how deep the SDK goes. I'm very excited about it. I'm looking for, I don't know if someone else can look for what Andy put in there. I can't find it quickly. So
I found it if you want me to just read it verbatim.
Yeah, go ahead.
Andy Carluccio says, 5:57 a.m. I won't be able to hop on today, but just to provide a quick statement on the Zoom Video SDK announcement, it is just a rename of the fully customizable SDK, which introduces a way to get raw data, yay, but at the expense of getting kicked off the Zoom meeting platform. Apps created on Video SDK cannot join normal Zoom meetings, and meetings created in Video SDK cannot be joined by VSDK. So that's his statement.
So they're going to give you a bunch of control, but you're on your own. You can't suck people in and out of Zoom, which I think it'll be. I think that's interesting. I'm curious how that affects Andy. That's because it sounds like his can't interact with regular Zoom clients. Tim and then Chris.
That's exactly what Andy said in one of his other posts, is that it's going to be, he called it a dagger for people who need the raw data license.
Chris?
For what you do, Alex, it seems like it would be
perfect.
Yeah, because you get the benefit, you always say that one of the benefits of doing Zoom point-to-point as opposed to all the other options is that it's Zoom. So if you don't know how to use it, ask your 10-year-old. They'll show you. Everybody knows how to use Zoom, but now it's my wife just said, I don't. But because it's now you can get a clean feed. So you get somebody like Andy to write you or somebody to write just the Alex Lindsay clean point-to-point tool.
Yeah.
Done.
Well, and you still, then you would send a client over to the other person as well, because it sounds like they can't use the current infrastructure for that. So it's using their infrastructure, but not using their stuff. I think that's, we'll have to, there's a second, someone should put it in second hour. Let's get Andy on. Let's maybe even next week or something and have us all discuss it. So I think it's exciting. For other things that I'm working on beyond just the point-to-points, it's super exciting for me. And so, but I do see that it could be damaging to what Andy's doing. And so I'd like to figure out what it all means. So let's see if we can get some folks on to talk about it. All right, next question.
Guy Cochran's up next from Seattle with, what have you seen ruin a live stream and how could it have been prevented?
It's probably a whole second hour there. We'll do a light version and then we'll do horror stories as a second hour. So at some point.
There were interesting questions today.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple events that we call, the events that will not be named. Like that, now bandwidth is usually, in a live stream, bandwidth is oftentimes connected to bad things. And number one is never trust a hotel. Like, just tell you that they're going to give you bandwidth. You want a company or a professional that is not connected to the hotel to give you bandwidth, or to manage the relationship with the hotel and manage all the processes. But but in general with bandwidth, the number one thing with live streaming is you don't trust anybody. Like when it comes to bandwidth, you don't trust, but verify all the time, and have a backup and know where you're going to go with it, and don't just worry about that. Most of our problems in live streaming has been related to bandwidth. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Stuart, and then Courtney, and then Doug.
Yeah, for me, as putting myself in the audience point of view, like what makes things unwatchable is, of course, as a sound guy, I may be biased, but bad sound.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as well that when last year when people started rushing in and started doing live streams, even some companies that actually make products for sound had pretty poor sounding streams as well. So yeah, sound.
I will say I give people a lot of room, but having bad audio, if you're an audio company, it's bad. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Courtney.
I get a simple one. It's when the person you're doing the stream for doesn't have their, I'm trying to think in not Australian terms, have their everything together, and pieces of equipment that are essential to the event that they're running fail. So you're left there with a stream that is amazing and no content to put on it.
Yeah. No content is a common one. I don't know if it ruins the stream, but it definitely takes a lot of fun out of it. Courtney?
Yeah, don't use AirPods or any other battery-powered monitoring or microphone device on a long event.
Yeah,
I've seen so many major events like the Princess Bride reading of the whole, Josh Gad was the first 10 minutes of the show.
Yeah.
His AirPods had died.
Yeah. Doug?
Yeah, one thing you need to do for a live stream is actually practice ahead of time. I mean, don't try to do it live. You should practice ahead of that so you know
The
ins
biggest
and outs and test everything twice.
The more rehearsal you get, the better it's going to be. I mean, in general, not always. If it's going to be a live conversation, you can wear out the speakers. They'll say all the things they were going to say, and then it feels very canned. But with everything, like for us, getting in, how do you get in and how do you get out is super important. So we'll practice the open until we're bored. Like, how are we going to get in? Now how are we going to get in? Now how are we going to get in? And making sure that we just know it over and over again. Guy? And then Jason.
Yeah, really thankful for the show because I've learned so much of what not to do. So I thought I'd circle back around some of these. One of the ones that impacted us was one of those cascading failures where I noticed it at the beginning and I didn't do anything about it, which was I noticed that we were plugging a lot into one circuit, 120 amp circuit. And boy, did it bite me later. 11,000 people on and we dropped the breaker. It just reset. Somebody plugged in a GH5 battery to recharge it. It was the roaming Teradek cam and it just it was a Mac Pro running Wirecast and it just went down. So we spun it back up. And unfortunately, when it went down, it also reset the drive, which was recording. And so that drive was no longer the default drive. And so the system drive became the default drive, which Wirecast then filled up the Mac Pro's internal drive, which killed the stream a second time. So a couple lessons learned there.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of pointing to one of the reasons that we tend to use hardware for a lot of things is that they come back up quickly and they don't change very much of what they're doing. So that's and then UPSs and so on and so forth. There's a lot of us that have. I think I had a whole row in my warehouse just of UPSs. International ones, local ones, big ones, small ones, and anything that was important, I would separate it off. And again, we were constantly looking. We looked at our circuits to some degree, but really looked at how much the UPSs were drawing, so that we knew that if something happened to the circuit, there's probably, out of a couple thousand events, there's probably 15 or 20 where somebody kicked something. That was it. They just kicked something. But we almost always, after the first couple horror stories, we always had UPSs. So you just hear the UPS start beeping. Then you have a couple minutes to run around and figure out what happened. Jason, and then Chris.
Yeah, +1 on the no Bluetooth, and I do mean absolutely no Bluetooth. I'll take it one step farther than AirPods. Also, Gaffer's Tape is your friend. Tape absolutely everything down every chance you get, because kicking stuff is the very best way to look colossally stupid.
You go, Chris, and then Bill, pretty quick.
Yeah, I was indirectly involved with a Zoomcast where they did the test on the day before with one of the Zoom accounts, and then when they actually ran the show, it was done with a different account. They're both corporate accounts, and they both had a lot of power, but none of the switches were switched on, and none of the permissions were given on that second account when they actually had to do the show. So,
go ahead, Bill.
I've never seen one, but isn't there any kind of an amperage meter that's rack mountable that you can see what the current draw is from your rig?
So absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. But absolutely. But problem is, what rig is that connected to, and how many other things are connected to it? All those other things. How you manage power is really important. Like, for instance, all of our laptops we put outside of that because we know that they have their own UPS. So they sit on the outside of typically of that, so they don't add draw to the UPSs. So there's a lot of like managing that process. But power, internet are the two things that will, put a knife in you, while you're working. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, a lot of modern UPSs, and especially the rack-mounted ones, will have a current meter on them. Yeah. And usually we segregate each rack on its own. Like, it has a Furman, which also has a current meter. That Furman powers up a couple of UPSs, and down the line, it powers up the actual equipment.
Yeah, a lot of the power distribution that you can get for racks are amazing. Like, they'll tell you every outlet what it's drawing if you buy the right ones. Go ahead. The PDUs are amazing. Go ahead, TJ.
Well, Alex, it doesn't apply in your situation because you're using Dante, but if you're using analog audio, having your laptops on a different circuit or a different phase than the UPSs can be a real problem.
Yeah, that's why we don't use a lot of. Well, those are producer laptops. The production laptops all end up oftentimes in the same place, especially if they're managing audio for that reason. Yep. Next question.
Rupert McRae of Dallas, Texas, actually has a pair of questions that are research-based, kind of interesting in my perspective. He starts with a 2020 study from Grandview Research Project projects the U.S. virtual events industry will grow from about 94 billion 4 times in 2020 to 404 billion by 2027. Is the panel aware of the study or have any thoughts otherwise on the accuracy of those numbers? And he has a link to the full report.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. Projections are always projections. We just always have to make sure that we take them the way that they are. What projections are really useful for is when you're doing business plans, putting them in because, venture capital love to see little graphs that somebody else made other than you. And so, but they're projections. I think that they're probably accurate. They might even be a little low. I think that virtual events are going to be are going to become a very, very, big deal. And I think it's kind of connected to his second question, which I think is probably, I as applicable. Why don't we just go ahead and jump into that one as well?
Sure. That's
Then we'll
Rupert
talk about
McRae
both of
back
them.
again from Dallas with an article published yesterday, reported that in 2020, digital event companies such as EventBrite raised hundreds of millions of dollars in funding from investors who see a future where events will still take place digitally. How does the panel think this money will be spent? And it's actually, he's got the reporter in the news story in the Dallas Morning News link there, or noted.
My guess is very badly. I'd like to, because I'm going to talk to event people. So
I think there'll be a lot of money chasing very little actual knowledge.
So here's the thing: is that we're in these meetings and we listen to people talk about what they're planning to do, and most of it is probably not going to work very well. In my opinion, and people can, we've talked about this a couple times, so I'll say it really quickly. I really see four types of events kind of coming out of the pack, and they all have their pluses and minuses: fully physical, fully virtual, digital first, and hybrid. Fully physical is everybody in one place. There's no streaming. You're just having a dinner. Fully digital is everyone's at home, or studios or whatever, but there's no congregation of anybody. Digital first is all the presenters and all the presentations are in studios. There's nobody in them. And the reason I say digital first is it means that for the digital audience, they are first-class citizens, so that, and then hybrid is that we're, doing what we used to do, shoot in the back of the room. I mean, people will paint lipstick on that pig, but that's what it is. Is just, we're going to put cameras in the room and we're going to do the best we can to include the online audience. The hybrid is a disaster. And I say this as someone who's done hundreds, possibly thousands, over 1,000 hybrid events. They are a rolling 737. And people will force that one for a while, thinking that that's the way to go, but they will not survive. It'll take a decade, for them to die out, because people are going to spend billions on trying to make that work, and it's just not going to work. Because as soon as you put a human being in the room, when we go back to Madeline's thing over the weekend, Mad in the kitchen, one person in the room put us all on the outside. Because the host is now interacting with that person and with the crew and with the whatever, what really makes a difference is to separate that out, and anyway, so I think that we're going to, keep on moving more and more towards a digital first. Digital first is going to be the big one. All those other three will survive and become massive. I think digital first will be the ones that are the biggest, because digital first can have 1,000 people in the room. It's just not the speaker. Speaker may be in another room in the building, but the 1,000 people in LA and the 1,000 people in New York and the 1,000 people somewhere else all have the same experience. No one's in the back of the room. Everybody has the same personal experience that they're all on equal, and the person sitting at home on their Apple TV and the person in the subway on their phone. Everybody has that. They're all first-class citizens, inside of that event. And I think that's why, and essentially what it allows for is that intimate connection between the speakers, where the audience gets to sit in the middle of that, right between them, and experience that interaction between them. I would much rather, and I had this moment where we'd done a bunch of events with Richard Branson and him talking in a room. We did some events there, and then I watched him do a discussion with Elon Musk. And if you find it, you can probably find it on YouTube, Google for Entrepreneurs or something like that. But the two of them talk, and they're a little rocky at the beginning, and then they really start talking, and it's just an incredible conversation that would never happen in front of a bunch of people on a stage. With them sitting at their homes, Elon in some giant chair and Richard Branson in Necker Island. And there was the video is pretty bad because it's, a satellite from Necker Island or whatever. But you see this intimate conversation that you're not going to get on stage. And I think that's why I think it's going to go that way. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Stuart.
I'm going to add one more, which is kind of in the hybrid area, but doesn't have to be. I think there's going to be intimate conferences where you have a group of maybe 20 at the most that are sitting around in a round table and kind of being the champions. They're collecting the information from their audiences to ask the questions and get content that way.
I think I think that really it's, why not just get it straight from the audience though? Why would you, I don't know why you would do that.
So because they'd be like a champion for you, they'd be able to reposition your questions so it sounds a little bit more not important, but yeah, I'm even doing this question or this point wrong, but you get the idea is they kind of reword the question so it comes across a little bit better and maybe they get a better answer out of it.
Maybe. Stuart and then Courtney.
Yeah, two quick things. Firstly, sadly, the best quality of the Elon Musk and Richard Branson thing I could find when I looked the other week was 360p. So, yeah, if there's anyone with a higher desktop,
welcome to Hangouts back then, like it was probably
the 90s.
360p.
And just a reminder to anyone at places like EventBrite and other events companies that there is a panel here of people who have spent a lot of time this past year learning how to do this properly. And you are welcome to hire any and all of us.
Very good, Courtney.
Well, I think certain types of events post-pandemic will move to a kind of a hybridized version where the big shows like car shows, auto shows, trade shows, where you want to go kick the tires literally of the new equipment and handle the new equipment, see what it feels like. They'll still have a showroom where that stuff will be, but I think the individual talks and a lot of the individual sessions of those trade shows will be broken out into virtual sessions. And so instead of having them at the event, you will have them online. So more people can participate. And I agree with you. It opens up to a wider audience. Yeah.
And what I would love is if you're going to talk about, let's say, the future of cars, I would rather have someone from BMW coming from BMW and someone from Ford in a Ford Motor Factory and someone from, with the background looking cool and people working or whatever is way more interesting to me than having them up on a stage poorly mic'd, with open speakers, so, and that's all possible now, and getting to be easier and easier and easier. And I think that when we start seeing that happen, I think we're going to keep on moving down that path. So I think the top three will exist. Hybrid will exist, but it's a horrible idea. Like it's just, and again, as someone who promoted it, as someone who did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these at all different sizes, all different flavors, designed all the chairs and the lights and the cameras and everything else. It just doesn't work. It doesn't, there's no, I've had all the money to do this. And I'm just telling you, it will never work for the online audience. It's fine for the people in the room, but the online audience now, when we had 15,000 people in the room and 300 watching the stream, you make it for the room. Now we have, as this online thing scales, it's really a broadcast. And once it becomes a broadcast, you really have to start thinking about, do you really need those people in the room? Some people do. And people say, well, people need to react to the audience. Well, actors don't. Film actors don't. They have to ignore the audience. They have to do their thing without interacting with the audience at all. And so I think that it's just a matter of it's a different person that will be useful in this new realm. Next question.
Up next is Paul Wallace of Austin, Texas, and he says, "Can Craig K please explain and demo how he got the Wyze security camera to work as a webcam?"
Is Craig here? Hey, Craig. Hey, there you go.
Hi. Good morning, everyone.
Hey.
Yeah, it's real simple. It's for those who don't know, the Wyze Cam is a $20 security cam, Wi-Fi security camera. It back in a year ago, they decided to put out a firmware change for a second release of firmware separate that turns it into just a USB web camera. It's really simple. You download the firmware, stick it on the micro SD card and slide it in, reboot the camera, and there you go. The only other thing that I've done with it, obviously you have to run the USB cable for it, and it's a USB type A port on the back of it. So that's a little awkward. You might have to get an A to A cable, which are bizarre, but and then I've just cropped it using I'm using QLab, but just using any camera software because it's 178 degree or 180 degree camera. So
go ahead, George.
Professional mic muted. Once you turn that or flash that firmware, does it disable its other features, or is it an A or B thing, or can it do both still?
It's an A or B. It's one or the other.
All right. Next question. Oh, sorry, Jeffrey. One more. Go ahead, and Courtney.
Just curious. Does it still do it? Because there was a firmware to change it to RTSP. Can you still do that, or did you try that?
The RTSP firmware is an update to the security camera feature. So that works with the security camera mode. When it's in webcam mode, that's all it does, and it's wired only. The Wi-Fi is disabled.
Okay.
And it's
But you
for
can have
anybody who's
both on.
looking for
That's
them.
awesome.
Yeah, for anybody who's looking for them, it's the version 2 of the camera only. The new one, version 3, doesn't have this function.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Do you know if it works with the PTZ ones, like the one that's over my shoulder back there?
Yeah, it's strictly for just the version 2 version 2 Wyze cam.
Next question.
Ken Jordan of Epsom in the UK says, what is the best way to set up time syncing on 2 Blackmagic cameras? He's got an Ursa Mini Pro G2 and a Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, and he wants to set time syncing between that and a MixPre 6.2.
Nikki?
Yeah, I would recommend getting a couple of timecode generators. What I use mostly are the timecode systems ultrasync ones, which are little tiny timecode generators that sync together wirelessly. You would jam one unit from your MixPre, and you'll put a box on each camera, and they will get the timecode wirelessly, hook them up to the camera, and you're good to go. Another box I like is the Ambient Nano Locket, which is Ambient's version of the same thing, but in a slightly heavier metal housing.
Next question.
Ken Jordan of Epsom in the UK says, do you have any recommended brands for V-mount batteries or any brands to avoid?
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Bill.
I'm a big fan of the batteries from IDX. They have been the most longer lasting cells in my opinion. But the thing I don't like about them is they lock you into their ecosystem, and you can only use like IDX batteries on IDX chargers and vice versa. Another brand I like is Swittronics, which I think now is called Core, and also another brand that I've only purchased one battery from them so far, but so far it's been quite good, is FX Lion. I'm not sure if it's available in the US yet, but have a look. I got one of their Nanos, which is a tiny V-mount battery, 50 watt hours, and it has a USB-C output, and also you can charge it via USB-C as well. So I could charge my MacBook from it. It only outputs 45 or 50 watts, but it's enough to keep a computer going for a bit if you're not doing heavy work on it. But yeah, I've only had it for over a year, so I don't know exactly how long their cells last.
Bill, and then Stuart, and then Jason. Pretty quick though.
Yeah, just an overall comment. Batteries have been getting smaller in form factor with more energy density because there's a lot of research going in them, I think, because of the electric car industry and everything else. Yeah. So the old big batteries I found always really a pain in the rear end, particularly to travel with.
Do you have a V-mount?
Yeah, I've had V-mounts forever. I switched off. I'm on the Sony smaller batteries now, okay. But I've used them for decades. And I'm just saying the smaller form factors have as much power, but do pay attention to travel restrictions, because sometimes you get in trouble with too many lithium-ion batteries on traveling.
Yep, Stuart, and then Jason.
I'm going to follow on with what Bill was saying. The smaller form factor is because a lot of the NPFs and the like are using lithium polymer batteries instead of lithium ion batteries. Now, does anyone want to know what the difference is? Because it's the case of the battery. A lithium ion battery is a 18650 cell put into something like that. So you've got a round cell that's like a large AA battery, and you've got
just
space
cut that one open?
between them.
Just cut it open for us. It's not that expensive.
I actually have one that's in parts behind the curtain, but not this one. But whereas a lithium...
Oh, there we go.
Lithium,
good.
Yep, hang on. A lithium polymer battery will be more that sort of shape, and all it is, it's in a polymer coating.
There you go.
Right? So these are 18650s, and yes, I can recommend the Switch brand for a sort of bargain price version. They're pretty reliable.
Go ahead, Jason.
Core SWX Powerbase Edge. I've got a handful of these, and I use them to power the Blackmagic 6K, and I've been thoroughly impressed.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Well, Anton Bauer has been a name in the battery industry for many years, and they make a lot of V-mount batteries, so you might try them, and they're high quality, but not cheaply priced.
Next question.
Thoughts on Microsoft's bid to buy Discord, mentions Hector Rodriguez in Springfield, Virginia.
That's the current rumor. 10 billion. Go ahead, Stuart.
Please, no. Don't give in. And if anyone from Zoom is getting an offer from Apple or Microsoft, say no. Okay, don't let Zoom go the way of Skype, and don't let Discord go the way of Facebook.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Skype was the most disappointing acquisition I've pretty much ever seen in my entire career. Microsoft took it and then destroyed it, and then destroyed it again and again and again. So if they do end up acquiring it, please just leave it alone. You know, let it be its own thing, like the Xbox.
I mean, I think Microsoft's done relatively well with LinkedIn, you know, as far as not really tweaking too much of what LinkedIn does. You know, I think that's been a little easier, a little better transition. You'd think that, and Discord, I think that there's an interesting interaction between Discord and LinkedIn, and you know, obviously Microsoft went after Slack and didn't quite get it. And I think that you look at some of these things and you go, well, as a big company, do I invest in it early? Because, like, for instance, Zoom would have been a good buy for somebody last year, or year 18 months ago, and now it's, you know, too expensive to buy. You know, and so those are the things that they start thinking about, is what's the trajectory, and how do we take advantage of it? Next question.
Talakwa Lopez Waterman out of New York says, in the pre-show there was a discussion of Arduino versus Raspberry Pi. Is there a Pi solution that is a small form factor and as cheap as the Arduino and MCU platforms? I use small footprint in Arduino, but is there something that small in Pi that's interesting?
I think Jonas would be the right person to probably talk to this to some degree, but Courtney, did you raise your hand there?
Well, there's a Pi Zero. There are small versions of the Pi that are designed for that. And then, you know, if you want to go with a full operating system or something that you're using for a desktop, I don't have one handy, there's stick PCs that are smaller than the Pi that give you, you know, a full operating system and the ability to run just about anything. And they're not as reasonably priced as a Pi. They're in the $100 range rather than the $35 range, but they will, you know, do something similar and give you a lot more versatility.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we talked about it a little bit on Saturday. I think that the Arduino really is, for me, it's less about size and more about kind of a little bit more to the metal, less of a abstraction from the hardware itself with an operating system. So I think that's the thing that makes it possibly more stable, harder to work with, but more stable and more limited. You know, so next question.
Talak says, I checked out the YouTube of the evening show and felt it was a bit more glitchy than normal, more glitchy in the switches, audio dropouts, and resolution. Was something up with Zoom or YouTube, or was it just on my end?
It's probably something up with Zoom or YouTube. I mean, probably the interaction between that. We're doing the evening. My guess is that the evening in the United States is probably heavier traffic, you know, and so there's probably more handing off than there is in the mornings. So that's I don't think it's anything on your end. I think it's almost definitely just the infrastructure and the limited nature in which we do this. So it's still kind of amazing that we can get out to a couple hundred people for nothing or almost nothing.
From point of view, part of the show creators, it was, I think, as smooth. It felt to me that the evenings are a little bit less formal and more smooth in terms of presentation. That's just my impression.
Tim?
Yeah, I had consistent Zoom issues yesterday, both in the morning. I actually, Zoom crashed my computer. My CPU usage went way up and it just shut down. That's how I disappeared in the middle of the second hour. And then last night I also had problems. And then finally my CPU usage went back down, but right now I'm at 42%. If you can't hear the screaming fan in the background in this machine, it's because Zoom's noise canceling does work.
Next question.
JJ McKenna, Santa Venetia, California, with tomorrow as the office hours New Year. Happy New Year, everybody. Would it be possible to have our own ball drop video to celebrate? Maybe a globe dropping, since this is a global community.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I think just reminiscing would be probably good. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
JJ, I think you just volunteered to do something.
Yeah, I probably won't go too far on the silly side. I mostly just want to use it as an opportunity for us to talk about, like, reflect a little bit and see where we're at. I'm not the real. If you haven't, I know it'd blow you guys away, but I'm not really the New Year's Eve kind of guy. so I call it that, but I mostly just want to talk. Go ahead, John.
Just mentioned there is a Zoom update 5.6.0 launched this morning.
Very good. Next question.
Ruben Marchena of Grand Rapids, Michigan is back with, how can you do digital first in a house of worship? Churches can't fill every seat because of social distance.
I mean, I'll go back to, I just think that, like, my wife watches sermons almost constantly. Like it's, it's kind of, when she's not working, and I've watched a bunch of them they've got like 10 people in the audience or 15 people in the audience, and I just am not clear why they're doing that. Like, to be honest, like I just think that it would look better and sound better if you just did the sermon on stage for everybody. I think that I know that people. I completely understand the power of having a whole lot of people in one place at one time, and I think that we'll get back to that. And I think that there is an energy there that's hard to get other ways. But I think for houses of worship, I think there's a lot of opportunity to discuss things like what we're doing here, but about the things that you're talking about. And it's a different experience. It's not the same experience, but it can be something that happens more often and or happens on that day. And whichever day is the house of worship day for that religion. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I think we need to, the way it's been structured is what everyone's trying to get back to, and that's what all events are trying to get back to. But I think there's an opportunity to scale a lot further with some creativity. Courtney, and then Marty.
Well, for a lot of houses of worship that are that have a lot of choirs or music based, you have to have people in the room to do that, and COVID makes that difficult because that's one of the biggest spreaders is singing in close quarters, so people spread out. So I think the reason they have those 10 people in the audience is for hymns or for participation, vocal participation in unison,
right,
that a lot of worship services depend on. So I think there's a need for that. So you need to have some people in the room to affect that. But if they have to maintain social distancing, it's miking becomes a problem.
Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, so we're approaching the notion of hybrid worship these days, where there's some live. There are people live in the room that are participating in the worship, plus some attendees, some in the congregation. But a lot of people will continue to participate online, and there will be some playback of pre-recorded material that everybody should be able to see. And the challenge then becomes how to unify the two different congregations, those that are in the room and those that are watching online, providing an awareness that they're of each other and interaction. And office hours is a community of people who are directly talking about these kinds of events, and it has actually spawned two other communities. There's Leo, who is often on the panel, hosts a show that is specifically for Jewish worship, and I host another show that is for multi-faith congregations that are transitioning from virtual worship now to hybrid worship.
Yeah. I don't think, for the online audience, I don't think it'll ever be great. I mean, I think they can watch the sermons, but it's never going to be great. There's no, I don't see any, I think that there will be a time when folks get good at it online, and then they'll take over, like that's what's going to happen. Like the people that are online that aren't coming in, it's just that there are folks that have been doing this in broadcast for a long time. And so they already kind of understand that model. Bill?
I'm just hoping it doesn't follow the path that we saw in voiceover, which was originally when I started out, you worked your local market, you went to the radio stations, the production facilities, you did that. When the internet blew up and voiceover became a global phenomenon where anybody could essentially wire in and do that work, everything changed and it got messy. There was a messy transition period that I think is going to happen the same way in worship online, where there was so many smaller people in voiceover trying to compete for every ticket. And you got the ascendance of things like Voice 123, where there were just masses of people who said, well, I've got a mic, I can do this.
Well, people just won't come back.
Shook out.
Yeah, people won't just come. Same thing that happened with Photoshop. I was one of those people that just rushed the door, and all these Cytex operators were like, "Oh my gosh, these people with Photoshop, are taking our business away." And yeah, I took it like ruthlessly, and I took that ground really fast, and a bunch of us did, and we made lots of mistakes. I printed a whole 1-page ad pure black because I didn't understand what dot gain was. So it was $1,200 mistake. I didn't do it again. I think you're going to see a lot of that. To generalize things, though, is the big advantage for any organization, I don't know whether it's religion or non-religion or anything else, is the ability to aggregate people unconstricted by geographic location. That is what's going to make a huge difference. It's what we're doing. Like we have aggregated people from all over the world, based only on their interests and only on their, not where they live or even sometimes what they do. And the thing is for any organization, whether it's any kind of nonprofit, a religion, a business organization, the ability to use these tools. But the problem is that you will not grow if you keep on doing hybrid events, because you have this huge opportunity of people that'll want to tie into you, but they'll just get kind of an okay experience, and it'll be, oh, it's not as good as being there. When you create digital events and when you commit yourself to building a digital community and make it digital first, where the people where everybody's getting that great experience, you have a much better chance of growing that online and growing it globally. And the numbers, you're now not limited to the, 500,000 in the greater Pittsburgh area. You're limited to 7 billion people, let's say 4 billion with good bandwidth, with reasonable bandwidth, and it's a much bigger market, but it doesn't work when you do hybrid. Like it just doesn't. It doesn't work as well because they're never going to be first-class citizens. Tim?
I think it takes a couple of things. First, you have to have your clergy solidly behind anything like this, and it may cause some upset in the local social aspect of your congregation. You maybe have a worship committee and an altar committee, an aesthetics committee, and these are all stakeholders now that are going to lose or potentially lose some of their say. So you have to make this case to a whole lot of peripheral people and have that support. And then you got to take it to leadership and say, hey, the other thing I've noticed, because I'm reviewing an audio track for a house of worship right now, and what I'm seeing, the complaint they had about it was that it's like we're lacking excitement. And that's absolutely correct. And aside from the fact that the mix needs some help, and probably the person mixing it has no isolation to hear what they're really doing, is how do we make that experience interactive for the folks at home? They're doing kind of a hybrid event. I see some people in the audience, but what we're not getting is we're not getting a reaction shot when the singer hits the high note. We don't get the people clapping. There's no sense of participation in it. And what I see is that it's that fourth wall kind of thing. And it goes back to sitting at the kids' table that you talk about, Alex. Even in this situation, the people watching at home and trying to participate at home don't have a direct avenue into that participation. And I think that's what's really lacking.
I think that, and I'm going to move on, but just to generalize this really quickly, is that this is the same problem that all organizations are having. This isn't just house of worship. This is everyone wants to go back to a physical experience. Everyone wants to go back to something that they know, and they will. They'll struggle along. This is what happens with a disruption is generally there's a disruption, and then there's a whole bunch of people trying to hang on to where it was before, but that thing is sliding away. Like once it breaks, like COVID has broken this connection, and we've suddenly billions of dollars have gone into this, and the whole thing is sliding. Now, will it slide in 1 year? No, it'll take 10 years to slide, but it's sliding. And it's not coming back. And so, you can still build a good business possibly for the rest of your career doing something that is in the past, but it's not. The future is going to be building these much more global events. Next question.
Okay, Felipe Bias of Prague, Czechia says trying Dante DVS for the first time between a Mac Pro and a NUC PC. Neither sync the clock. On the Mac Pro, I already tried using Thunderbolt to Ethernet adapters, and with that, the connection, not even the information about the Mac Pro appear, and the NUC doesn't appear at all on the list of devices. Any advice?
Go ahead, Craig.
First thing is, if you're using DVS between two computers, there is no clock. So you either have to have a piece of hardware or Dante Via, which I know some people in the panel have had less than great success with. I've used it well. But,
oh, you have? Okay,
yeah.
good. You're the first one.
But I know that it's limited.
Yeah. Generally, our fix for most Dante is to get a piece of hardware somewhere in there that, it can be a simple piece of hardware, but something with the Dante chip in it, or the yeah. Go ahead, Mickey.
You definitely need a hardware clock source in the network. And on top of that, make sure your switch or whatever network infrastructure you have allows clean passage of NTP, Network Time Protocol.
Next question.
Jonas Tuttel of Reutling in Germany says, has someone seen the new Zoom update, and are the new participants' view controls in there?
Has anyone? I don't know. We haven't created an event with it yet. When I jump to the post show, I have to go right after the post show, but we'll play with it. Go TJ tomorrow. We'll play with it.
I can't speak to the new controls, but I'll say that all three of my cameras are behaving differently this morning after the update without a reboot.
And are they behaving differently in a good way or a bad way?
Bad way. My huddle cam was squeezing. This is the 1C, and it jumped to a wider mode than it was earlier today. Mm-hmm. And my laptop, my Dell laptop camera is not performing well either. So, but it may just be, it needs a reboot because I did it between the pre-show and the first hour.
Next question.
Andy Kofendorfer of Melbourne, Florida says, any word on Zoom releasing speaker timer?
Speaker timer?
Like a countdown, how much time you have left. I think that's what they're.
It could be fun. I mean, you could do that now. I mean, that's actually a pretty good, really interesting one for using the playout B would be to have a clock that you could kind of reset or redo that isn't just another window that you could just have it play out. I mean, it'd be nice. There's software that does it. There's Speaker Timer Pro, and there's a bunch of other ones that can be used. Mickey?
Might also be an interesting sister company to meetingmeters.com. Have a little web interface where people can type in a certain amount of time, and that goes into the meeting. Yeah. Jonas, Guy?
Next question.
Keenan Campbell of Princeton, Illinois says, with the release of Formula One Season 3 on Netflix and all the high-tech everything that they do for comms and telemetry, I found it strange that teams were crowded around a laptop for Zoom calls. Nothing set up with pro-grade equipment. Why do you think they don't invest in solid conferencing solutions?
So generally, it's because the people working on it don't think that they just think, well, it's all bad, right? They just go, well, there's no way to make that good, so we're just going to put them in front of a laptop. Like if they don't have broadcast tools, if I can't put a broadcast camera in there, I might as well just put a laptop in there, and they don't see the gradations of difference or what could be done because there's not a lot of people doing it well. And they look at other broadcasters and wow, that's a great example of not a lot of people doing it well. So I think that's the distinction, is that they haven't really had anybody playing that hard to do it. And they just think that it's all going to be bad, and we can't wait until this is over. That's the I think the general can't wait until this is over. And the problem they're having is that there's just this massive group of people now that are entering the market. This gets into that whole Photoshop discussion we just had. Is there's just this incredible number of people that have equipment now that can do this. This market is going to explode. Now, not F1. F1 market is maybe get some people on from F1. Anyway, so but there, by the way, that system would be really fun to get behind the scenes. They travel, these F1s travel in cargo. They have cargo containers that all just have these huge hookups between them, and they set up incredibly fast. It's an amazing setup that they have. Mickey and then Stuart.
Yeah, I have to totally agree. Like, a lot of people who are in the position to make these decisions are how do I put it? Dinosaurs. They're dinosaurs. And like, you know, I've been in a few productions wherein like we have to bring in people remotely and just showing them turn on the whole original sound thing. It's like, oh, you could do that? It's like, come on, guys, like
Right. Yeah.
5 minutes of Googling.
Yeah. Stuart.
Trust me on this, when it comes to Formula One, that's more a case of the person doing the broadcast and the editing and sending to Netflix and not internal for the teams. The teams will be so far ahead of what we are that their image will be even better, but that'll be internal to them, not to the broadcast itself.
Right. Next question.
James Babbitt here in San Diego says, with the goal of getting the good audio quality of office hours, could there be a Zoom studio in a Pelican case with everything already wired together with an iPad? A teacher could easily use the setup for each Zoom meeting.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, of course there can be. And nix the iPad, I would go with a Mac Mini. But yeah, of course, I think many of us on the panel have done pretty much that.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'd actually not, instead of a Mac Mini, I'd go with a NUC. And the reason why is because I suppose you can do a team viewer on a Mac as well, but being able to have some sort of control in there so you can actually make adjustments to the microphone, to the camera, that would probably be helpful in there.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, we've made kits for voiceover actors that get sent out so they can do their animation stuff from home. And the more complete and turnkey the kit, the more successful it is, especially when the engineer on the far end can control gain of their mic preamp so the actor can just be an actor, which is a nightmare these days where actors are expected to do a tremendous amount of gain management and all sorts of crazy stuff while forgetting that they're actors.
That's one of the reasons when we send out to some folks, we send out with the mix pre-3s or mix pre-3.2s with float, 32-bit float, because we can get close to what we need to do. But if they have something really loud or really whatever, we don't worry about it because it's all there. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, one of the things about the new Rode Wireless Go is that the receiver is a USB device. Let that sink in for a second. You don't need to go analog to digital. It is a USB device. So now you can just plug this directly into the iPad and there's no analog connection. It'll show up in Zoom as a source.
That's cool.
Rode's
That's
always
really
innovating,
cool.
man.
Is that USB-C?
It's USB. It's USB-C coming out of it, but what comes in the package is USB-A to USB-C. So you'd have to get a USB-C to USB-C cable to make it work.
Cool. Craig?
I was just going to ask, is that the double-headed one? The two?
Yeah,
wireless,
this is the new one. The Wireless Go.
Yeah.
The Wireless Go 2 is the new one that has this capability and has the recording built in too, which is also pretty nifty. So if a teacher is walking around and another teacher takes a hit, because if these get really popular in small areas, there is only so many channels. That's the downside to these, is that when we get back to the big, NABs and CESs, wondering how durable they're going to be in those high RF areas where some of us like to go with the big boys.
We used to always joke with the one thing you don't do at NAB or CES is use a Sennheiser mic, because everybody buys them and everybody leaves them on that channel, and all the channels are all crowded, and especially the one that it ships with is the one that you just can't. You're stepping on everybody all the time, even on broadcasts. It's a really funny, So we always get something obscure, and I always get obscure. I used to get obscure electrosonic blocks. Because I'd be way out somewhere else away from everybody else. The one thing I will say is that I'm just going to always remind people that content is easy to make or easy to watch. It's not both, almost ever. So,
hey, Guy, have you put the output of that system on a scope, and is it full bandwidth? Is there any companding or anything that might be limiting the signal?
I'm sure it's with any wireless. I mean, we could try the dangling key test or whatever you want to try, but I'm sure it's smashing it. And there's going to be a little bit of delay, so it's not a cable,
got it.
But I haven't put it on the scopes. But I'll come in tomorrow with my DPA plugged into it, and we'll see how it sounds.
But the thing to think about with all these kits is that it's really think about how to teach the teachers how to do it better than just have something they can open up, because it's just really hard. My kids watch these. It's hard. Next question.
Michael Fraley of Dallas-Fort Worth says, I have my own opinion about this, but I thought I'd ask the panel's opinion. Should churches or groups in general keep broadcasting to platforms like Facebook, which often is the worst quality to the audience? I get that Facebook is easy, but YouTube isn't hard and with enough advanced warning.
Good. Jason, real quick, and then we'll move on. We're running out of time.
I think it certainly can't hurt as long as you've got the bandwidth and, you know, you're getting interaction. Sure.
You go where the audience is. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I mean, if you do Facebook right, like AV Educate, I talked them into doing the vMix 1080 push-in with the API, and they have some demos where there's really fine text. Like yesterday was Disguise, and it looks gorgeous. I mean, it's awesome. So I don't think that it's the platform. It's just how you're pushing it in. You got to make it look. You got to put in the effort to make it look good. Otherwise, you're going to get 720. But the interaction is definitely there.
Often the comments are actually better in Facebook because of real names over what you get in YouTube a lot of times. The average view time is very low from our experience. Next question.
JJ McKenna, Santa Venetia here on the panel. Given that we're exposing more of our lives to the online community with various platforms, what are some measured benefits with the experimental YouTube automatic product detection in their platform?
You know, they're trying to find new ways to make the advertising more personal. You know, make sure that being able to buy stuff that you see in a show is the holy grail. I mean, I saw demos of that at Prime Sports Network in 1992. like the interaction of being able to reduce friction from what you see and what you order is just, there's lots of people think about that a lot. You know, so I think that's what we're seeing. And whether it I don't know if it really needs personal information to be useful. I think a lot of times it can be literally just showing you letting you order what you saw. Like, oh, what was that thing behind them that I want to buy? So, yeah, but it's going to keep going that way. Next question.
James Babbitt of San Diego, does it improve a hybrid event if the in-person audience is facing a large display showing the people who are attending on Zoom?
Go ahead, Jason.
Maybe, but they're still terrible.
I mean, what's good is you take the digital audience and put them on a screen in front of the speaker. That's a great digital event. You know, like, you know, if they need a response and they need a reaction, look at Tony Robbins. I mean, Tony Robbins is doing this with 30,000 people, having them jump up and down and be part of that, you know, conversation. And, you know, I think that when COVID ends, he'll probably go back to some kind of hybrid, but I think that there's some point where he's going to stop doing that because it just won't, I think he's a smart enough guy to realize that his impact, even for Tony Robbins, isn't going to really carry forward through that process, because if he has 1,000 people in the room, he can't pay attention to people online anymore, you know, and so that process will start to die off in that. But I think putting people in front of the speakers makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Last night I did something very interesting, and that was on Friday, Jennifer signed me up for WWE, and then I was in the crowd at the Raw event on Monday. And that was very interesting on how that worked. And I ended up being in the background about 3 rows up, which is about $100 seat right there. So it was really interesting. And I learned a little bit on how they did it. And yeah, definitely, even though it's not in person,
so then you
really
have to watch
the
it.
event.
Did you have to watch it from that angle?
They showed what everybody saw on TV, and then they had like a little corner. I got it on my Twitter and stuff like that. The picture that I was seeing, but yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's the worst part is, once again, it's browser based. So if your camera and microphone don't show up, then you have problems there, just like with any other web based version of video software.
Yeah, Courtney, real quick, and then we'll move on.
And if you're talking about a hybrid event with a big screen on the stage behind the speakers so that the hybrid audience can see it, I think it's a distraction. Because
it's not only a distraction, it's a huge technical problem. And usually you do that on LED walls, and then the LED walls destroy the video. You know, so that's the best way to make it look good is to put it in an LED wall. And then people generally don't have the money to get a 0.9 mil LED wall. And so what they end up with is moire and all kinds of other things. I mean, just look at even the Grammys, and there's all this weird pixelation and moire that came from that because they got too close a couple times. And so I think that's yeah, this is about as complicated as I'd like it to be. All right, next question.
George Saidi of Webster Groves, Missouri says, is there a way to pass MIDI out signals from an M-Audio KeyStudio USB keyboard on my iMac through a Scarlett 18i8 connected via MIDI in and out to a hardware synth without creating an instrument track in a digital audio workstation? No MIDI out DIN on the keyboard.
Go ahead, Jason.
Nope, not without some sort of intermediate, because those are two different plugs straight away.
Go ahead, Mickey.
You might want to try the MIDI Studio window, which is part of the audio MIDI setup panel on Mac OS. If you are, did he say he's on a Mac? Yeah, he said an iMac. You might want to try that. You can draw lines similar to how you can draw lines and loop back with it, and see if you can route to the output of the 18i8.
Next question.
Chris Widener of Lafayette, Indiana. Will QR codes as corner bugs ever actually take off?
Go ahead, Jason.
I can't predict the future, but part of me hopes not. Part of me hopes so. I don't know.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Actually, Jason said it a lot more eloquently, but please, no.
So we've used them in the past. The funny thing is that I think the QR codes are a lot more useful in the real world and not as useful in the digital one, because we have digital tools that are easy to just type in what you want to type in and short, do a bit.ly, or like when you see a Clubhouse, when we do Clubhouse on Wednesday nights, we'll just go to bit.ly bit.ly/Q4, TOH. I don't know if it would, the problem really is that the phone doesn't automatically, when you point at it, just do it. Like you have to open up a camera, you have to open up an app. And it's just, and so generally we did it we've done it with a couple events. And the problem you really get into is it's just easier to type in this chat than it is to use the QR code. So I think that in a digital world, especially when people are using the phone, so you put the stream on and what are they going to take a picture of? It's on their phone. So I think those are the challenges. And we have hyperlinks and we have other things that are tools that we have in our digital devices now. So I think that time may have gone. For broadcast, it's kind of useful because they don't have access to that. But yeah, it's shortened URL is oftentimes more effective these days than a QR code. Next. Okay. Now we're shifting gears, only 1 minute late to isolation. So last week we talked a lot about diffusion and treating the insides of the rooms. And we touched a little bit on isolation, but again, I think that this is something that I wanted to kind of dig deeper into, because it's something that I'm thinking about a lot recently, and it's something that's literally destroyed my studio because of not isolating it. And so I think it's important for us to kind of keep in mind of what it takes. And we've got a bunch of folks that I'm sure have dug into this a fair bit in the past, and George thinks about this a lot. Like this is kind of what he works on. So anyway, but I'm sure that between Mickey and Tim and Greg and a lot of other folks here, we've all, Courtney, I think we've probably all dived into the issue of isolation. And there's probably a couple different levels of isolation too. It's, we talk a lot about floating rooms, but there's a lot of stuff in between. George, when you're doing installs, how do you approach isolation?
It definitely, just for context real quick, the vast majority of what I'm doing is voiceover studios. And of those, the vast majority are in residences. So we don't go to too many extremes because we're not trying to isolate very low frequency sound. We're just really mainly concerned with noise coming from maybe 80, 70, 80 hertz and from the outside world and higher.
And why is that a challenge? Yeah. So you have to get pretty extreme for the lower frequencies, right? Because it has to do with the wavelength, right?
It does, yeah. The longer the wavelength, the more dense and thick material it can vibrate and shake. So that's where we really have to go to some real extremes in those cases. But for many people, and especially in the context of people who are going to be doing from home broadcasts, exactly like we are doing now, you're mainly just trying to. I always think of soundproofing like stopping a leak in a dam. You find the giant hole first, you plug that. For most people, that's going to be their windows. You address that first, and then you kind of move your way around the room. You check and see what the sources of noise actually are, how much of it is coming from outside the home versus the family and the pets and everything else, and the plumbing and the hot and the very loud HVAC system. And you start and you work your way all the way around, finding each of those, and they all have their own unique ways of being treated.
Yeah, do you do much treatment with the windows? One thing we've done with some of our offices is actually adding a couple panes of glass that are a couple inches apart to cut down on outside noises. Have you found that to be effective?
Yeah, in fact, there's a company I'm happy to mention called Indos. So think window without the W. They make a system that's designed to be installable by the homeowner, or I guess the business owner, depending on the situation. And they send you a kit to extremely accurately measure your opening. And then once you've done so, they will ship you everything you need to insert a nice heavy piece of glass into your window frame. In my case, I'm in a rental apartment in Venice. It's a building made in the 50s. They did a beautiful job updating everything, and then they punted on the windows because they sold the property owner or saved them a lot of freaking money. So we still have the lousy single pane windows. And the next thing I might have to do if I really want to take recording here to the next level is put an entire assembly of glass and bolt it all the way around the entire double set of windows to the drywall. So when I move out, I can take this thing out and patch the holes and not lose my deposit.
Right. Courtney and then Marty.
And speaking of windows, if you're building a studio that you need a window, a visual port into the studio, and I'm not talking about windows in a home where you're looking outdoors, but just to look into the studio, use 2 panes of glass and put the interior pane of glass that's inside the sound isolated area at about a 10-degree angle compared to the other piece. That will, make interglass reflections, eliminate that, so it'll be easier to see through.
Yeah.
Plus it will reflect the sound down into the floor where there's probably a lot of sound absorbing material rather than flat into the next wall and create a standing wave. So and of course make sure there's an inch or 2 inches of dead air space between the 2 panes.
Yeah.
And make sure that the glass is mounted.
And when you say
in a
dead air,
silicone.
what's important is to make sure that it can't push in and out, right?
It's sealed off, yes.
And do you build that into a vacuum, or do you just have it be
Most people don't put a vacuum because it's problematic because it'll eventually fail.
Yep.
Yeah,
Marty,
if you're really compromising between having an angled piece of glass, if it's going to make a really small gap at the bottom, you might just be better off staying parallel if it's a very small space, because that space between the 2 pieces of glass is almost the most critical thing. So, it's always a compromise, but if you have a bigger depth of window to work with, you can really get that nice pitch on the glass, and it does help.
Marty, and then Mickey.
I used the Indos in a historic property that I was treating, and they had single pane glass, of course, and they had an outdoor area that was used as a party space directly outside of an office, and the Indo people, they sent a technician to take extremely accurate measurements of the window using lasers and such. Some of the windows were not quite square. In one case, there was an arched top window.
Ooh.
And so what they do is they use a rubber surround around the edges, and you push it into the opening, and it fits exactly. And the plexiglass.
It's trunk rubber.
Trunk rubber. Wow,
the
really?
seal on your trunk of your car?
Oh, that's right. That's
trunk
right.
rubber.
And the plexiglass they use is acoustic and thermally rated, so it does both acoustic and thermal improvements. It was remarkable.
Yeah, one of the things for custom fitting, that's where things like LiDAR come in really useful. We've had some stuff where we had to fit things very specifically into a window, not necessarily glass like this. And you scan it, and then you literally send it back to the folks, and now they have, because it was a brick, and so we had one where we had to fit something in, and there were it was rough brick, and they literally printed a piece, that in sections that would fit And we were like, when we got it, they were like, there's no way this is going to work. And we just slid it in and it was like just perfect. Like just went down the brick and we were just like, okay, I need to own one of those. Anyway, Mickey and then TJ.
Yeah, just going back to the discussion of double windows, it also helps if the two panes of glass are, if possible, different thicknesses and also different sizes, so that those two panes have different resonant frequencies and they don't agitate each other. They start to cancel each other instead, and that helps with mitigating the transmission of waves.
That's great. TJ?
If you're not concerned about the size of the window, have some flexibility. If you can find double pane glass, two pieces of the thermally sealed double pane, and then build your window size around that, that gives you some extra isolation. Also, Courtney was very specific in his angle. You want the down angle to be on the inside of the studio, because if you do it like this on the inside where you can't get at it, you will get dust on that part of the window. Don't ask me how I know. And it is impossible to clean. So you have to disassemble the window and put it back the other way.
That's good. That's good, Chris.
Sorry if I missed this, but George, you were talking about Indos, the company that makes these retrofitted things, and then you talk about having to build your own and go into the concrete. Why does Indos not serve your purpose, and you were saying you have to do the manual retrofit yourself?
I'm so glad you asked. Well, one of the reasons is the way that Indos work is they have to fit into something. And, well, since I'm using an NDI camera, which conveniently shut off the second I picked it up because it's an iPhone and it's smarter than I am. There we go. My windows have no room. There's absolutely no room in my windows to mount the Indos. There's no, like, there's like a quarter round and then it's the trim. There's just nowhere to put them. And trust me, that was the very first thing I looked at when I moved in here. It was like, can I just do this? And no, I can't here. So good question.
Yep. All right. I think we got a couple questions. If you have questions about isolating audio, go ahead and throw them in there, and we'll cut through the questions that we have.
I'm using the NDI, by the way, because this thing just right before I went on freaked out.
We saw that.
So it's nice to just throw an NDI up real quick with Minicam.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
TJ Worrell of Minneapolis has our first audio question of the day. In the hierarchy of low frequency transmission mitigation solutions, where does sawing the concrete slab around the perimeter of the studio fall?
I saw this question in advance, and I'm so glad I did, because I have my opinions about this, and I'm not an expert in this particular area. But so I reached out to my buddy Skip, who is my mega brain that I tap into when I need that extra bit of sounding smartness. And may I read his one paragraph answer? It should take 30 seconds. Amazingly, he answered this within 10 minutes. The guy's awesome. He says, cutting a slab to achieve isolation of a floor inside a recording room is normally done when the contiguous floors are connected and there's a structural path for vibration through the floor. Normally, a rubber or bituminous membrane is used for this and placed in the cut to dampen and short circuit any vibration. The frequencies this is used for are all below 250 hertz. Frequencies above this are not sufficient to penetrate the concrete slab and cannot normally travel through the slab. Does this help, says Skip? So anyway, it's definitely for
Skip. We want to know who Skip is and why.
He's my secret. You can't talk to
We
him.
want to know who's Skip and when do we get Skip on the show? That's what we want
I
to know.
will try and see if he wants to do it. But he's just a simple man. He just does like massive theaters and giant buildings and stuff. Yeah, it's definitely one of the things you're going to consider when you're doing music production, where you're wanting to record very wide frequency range instruments like pianos, acoustical instruments, where noise floor at low frequency is super critical. But it's definitely not something you're going to consider doing lightly, because if you were to just take an existing room in a building and just literally take a concrete saw and cut the entire perimeter of the slab, that slab now has no foundation, so that slab is literally floating. Yeah, so it is not to be taken lightly. It is a very difficult thing to do correctly. So it would, in the hierarchy of things I would consider, it'd be very down on the lowest part of the list for most people.
Yeah, and then we were in a building that you weren't allowed to cut more than 4 inches in. So you know, like they would always tell you don't drill more than 4 inches because it was we found out later it's a super fun site. And so it's all capped. And they were like, I was like, it took me a little research to figure out why I wasn't allowed to drill. Why am I not allowed to drill? It's like, yeah, because you'll start letting out.
It's like Ghostbusters. They start seeping out. Coming out of the
Totally.
ground.
No, that was totally it. Mickey, and then Bill, and then Tim, and then Stuart.
Oh, I'll give my time to Greg. He has a lot of stories.
Go ahead, Greg. I missed Greg there.
The grayer the hair, the better the stories.
Yeah. I would say there's 3 things. There's mass, stops low frequencies. There's air, and then there's separation. Okay, so I mean, air and separation are kind of the same things, but I agree that cutting into an existing slab is probably low on the priority level. If you're doing new construction, though, building a second footing is perfectly within reason. And then a lot of people do concrete block construction for the wall, and you fill that with either sand or cement. That's one way to do it. Lead would be even better, but that's all great. Now, in terms of the floating floor thing, we had a situation in the studio that they built in the Philippines, where they built 3 rooms. They built an ADR stage, a Foley stage, and a dubbing stage, a film mixing stage. They floated the ADR stage and the film mixing stage. Okay, and they left the Foley stage alone because, they left the Foley stage alone so that possibly we could dig down. What happened was, at some point, somebody decided to swap the Foley and the ADR rooms. So the ADR room was now on the ground, and the Foley stage was floated. Ouch! It's like totally destroying 2 rooms. I mean, we managed to make it work, but it was not easy.
And that's because you're getting reverberation from all the things you're trying to make sound, right? To pull it out.
Absolutely. Every time you jump, the entire floor moves.
Right.
So it was kind of a nightmare.
Yeah, that's great. Bill, and then Tim.
This is just personal. I would never cut into a slab unless I had the absolute accurate plans of the original building. And I say that because when we converted a guest house property in the back of our horse property in Scottsdale, when they laid the slab, beneath that were things like HVAC return channels. There were specific areas of electrical ingress and egress. And if you're going to slice a slab and allow it to possibly move even inches, you can mess up the entire rest of the infrastructure that was carefully planned by your architects.
But other than that, fine.
It's easy.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tim, and then Stuart.
Yeah. Other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? If you're going to have an isolated slab, that means that you already have identified how this noise or vibration is being transmitted in. You've got to start at the source. Either if you're trying to keep sound in, that's one thing. If you're trying to prevent sound or vibration from coming in, that's another. But if you don't identify the source, the other thing is you can have an isolated slab, but they're all still sitting on the same thing. So any isolated slab has to be independently suspended, or you're just going to have the same transmission path back up into that slab. So it's not a panacea. It's very expensive, and it should be done during original construction if it's needed.
Good. Stuart, and then Marty.
Well, speaking of original construction and how effective this can be, where that passage from Skip mentioned the membrane, the global television studios, which were built by Channel 7 in Melbourne in the late 70s, early 80s, actually did that membrane design with both studios surrounded by a membrane, and the section between the studios where there was a loading dock and the main part of the office building for the studios, was isolated from the studios. Now, to tell you how effective this membrane design is, the UPS for that facility was a 12-cylinder diesel train engine mounted above the loading bay between the studios. When this thing was started, if you were anywhere close, it felt like you were in an earthquake. But if you're in the studios, you could not hear it. You could not feel it. Doing this design properly in the first place in construction is amazing and essential.
Go ahead, Marty, and then TJ, and then Mickey.
Yeah, so like just adding on to what other people have said, if you've got, if you're near a train track or if you have heavy trucks rolling around outside, that vibration transmission is going down through the ground and then coming up. So just cutting around the slab isn't going to buy you very much. But generally what happens is that you actually for studios, you're constructing a room within the room. It's a room within a room where the inner room is physically isolated on suspension layers on all 6 sides. So the floor is isolated from the ground and the walls are isolated from the outer structure, and so is the ceiling. So everything in the studio is, everything in the structure around the studio is free to move around, but the studio itself is isolated from it. And if you're just dealing with the floor, you can get underlayments that are cushioned and have specific absorption properties. So underneath your wood floor, you can put this underlayment in between as a sandwich.
Go TJ.
So the specific was 20 by 30 studio 2-wall cove. We did cut the slab to help from the truck traffic that was on the other side of the warehouse. Based on the empty room measurements, and then once we built the studio up, floating walls, et cetera, it seemed to make some difference with the amount of transmission we got from the trucks along the back alley. Unfortunately, due to cost, we didn't do anything with the ceiling. And once the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport added their next runway and we became part of the flight pattern, the studio became rather useless.
It's funny, I think the one thing about this a lot of times that I found with studios is you either do it all the way or you do it apart. Every time I've cut a corner on sound on a studio thinking, well, we're not going to use that right now, I get bit somewhere.
It's like water in a bucket. It finds the leak.
Airtight or it's airtight or it's not airtight. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think, it's important to take into account that when designing studios, you often aim for a certain NC level, noise criterion level. And for studios wherein you're recording more delicate sounds, like say a Foley stage, as Greg mentioned, there are times like we have to record the sound of cloth, for example. So stuff like that, like we need to go down all the way down to, NC 15. But if you're say recording maybe a rock and roll band, you can get away with NC 30 most of the time. Depends. So it's really on a case by case basis and how deep
can you describe to people what NC 15 and NC 30? Talk a little bit about what that means.
I don't know the math behind it, but essentially what it measures is how much noise is present in a space during normal operations, like with air conditioning all running and all the other regular noise factors being at play.
Sounds like a different measurement. Like, have you heard of STC? NC sounds like a better studio measurement algorithm or criteria.
I'm not familiar with STC.
They're related. I think the initials are noise coefficient, so I think there's a mathematical relationship.
And STL, sound transmission loss. One tells you how much you've got, the other tells you how much it will stop.
And then sound transmission classes. STC is sound transmission class, which you'll see a lot used when they're describing doors and partitions and stuff.
Yeah. Craig and then Marty.
Just real quick to go back to what Bill was saying, and I think it was Andrew in the chat. Pardon me. I work in theater primarily, and I did a show years ago where somebody decided they needed to drill into the floor in the trap room to mount a piece of equipment. And looking at original drawings is all well and good. X-ray is really the only thing you can do that's safe. They actually drilled into a 600 volt, 600 amp service that was buried in a conduit in the floor.
If you've ever been, the difference between the plans and reality can vary by a good little bit.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, Marty?
So different materials have different acoustic properties at different frequencies. So, for example, we can take a look at a chart here where these are different. These are different kinds of curtains at different weights and such. And if you look over here on the right, you'll see they're rated at different frequencies. So, how much absorption these materials have at different frequencies. The NRC, the noise reduction coefficient, is a single number that averages the losses, the absorptions at all of the other frequencies. So to get really specific, if you're choosing a frequency, you want to know what sound you want to absorb, what frequencies are important to absorb. But if you're looking for an overall absorption factor, then you use the NRC.
And so we've talked about a lot about concrete, but when we start thinking about, let's say we want to isolate a room, we want to float a room, how do you approach that? In that, like actually building something? You're not going to cut concrete, but you do want to create a gap. How much of a gap do you need to create? Like that's one of the things that, is it 6 inches? Is it 3 inches? Is it 1 inch?
How much
where
can
do
you
kind
afford?
of approach that? Right.
Yeah, what can you afford?
Yeah, the bigger the better. You always think of everything as mass, air, and mass.
Right.
And the bigger that space, the better the isolation.
Right. And what space you have, right? Yeah, exactly. What do you find typical, for that kind of gap?
In context again of voice or dialogue recording rooms, if you can at least have an inner envelope where your wall from the interior room is, and then the envelope on the outside be on separate sets of studs, and at least like an inch gap between them, that's a really good place to start. That's pretty typical. And in other cases, we'll use Isomax clips. There's a great company called kineticsnoise.com. That's, I think, arguably the best company out there in terms of the range of products they make for vibration isolation and having the data to back it up and the knowledge to spec out the right stuff for your job. And they make all kinds of really interesting things, but the things we use the most are Isomax clips, because you can just strip the drywall off your room and mount these clips, and then it's something called a hat channel that you then screw your drywall to. And you can do that. You can retrofit an existing room in a home without tremendous, it's still a mess. You got to tear the drywall out, but you don't have to literally construct a room in a room physically out of studs. The Isomax works extremely well because it's basically like an engine mount for your drywall. And the right kind of rubber is a really good isolator.
Go ahead, Bill.
So when I was taking what used to be a post-and-tin hay barn and converting it to my studio back in Scottsdale, it was useful for me to think of the whole thing as a capsule when we were building it out. And I thought of it that way because I wanted to make sure that that capsule barrier between the outside world and the inside of the studio was never breached by anything. And it's why we decided to put all of the conduit for electrical and everything surface mount on the inside so that we would not go through any of the things that we had built in terms of the four-wall system between the outside of the building and the inside. And that, and then you look at openings you have to have, doors. We had no windows because it was built as a sound studio, but the doors had to be solid and to a certain degree, and they were all with drop sweeps and things that made sure that you were closing off any ingress or egress of air, and hopefully that will be as close to eliminating sound as possible. You're never going to get 100%, and the only thing that stopped us from recording there was rain on the flat roof.
Never is a big word. I've been in some chambers that they got to never.
Yeah. Well, the anechoic chambers and things. Yeah.
The only thing I could hear is my tinnitus.
Yeah.
Have you been to the Apple facility by chance, Alex? Have you gotten to sneak in there? I haven't, but
Tim, go ahead.
That actually, what Bill was saying about penetrations within walls, it's a lot like being thermally efficient too. If you can feel air coming through it, you're going to hear sound coming through it. Also, big tympanic membranes like the roof on a barn, that the rainfall is what gets you, or even wind noise. And then this kind of goes back to something we discussed a week ago, reducing the number of parallel surfaces that are directly reflective. A little bit of angle helps a lot.
And do you do that with the walls as well? When you're floating a room, do you get them at an angle?
You can do that. And the other thing is that this goes back to the primary issue is you can't fix what you don't know. So if you don't know where the noise intrusion is coming from, or if you're trying to keep sound in, where it's going to go,
right?
And how much of it you got, you have to start kind of there. Otherwise you're chasing your tail, and you're going to be winding up throwing parts and construction and stuff because you don't know what you're trying to fix.
Yeah, go ahead. George, and then Marty, and then Bill.
I always thought of the angled interior walls to be an acoustical thing to break up standing waves, but have you guys found it to also be a benefit to isolation?
It's not huge, but it helps.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Marty.
So here's a picture of a method of building an isolated soundproof wall. If you take a look at this picture, you'll see.
Where's that from?
This is from Acoustical Solutions.
It's a good company.
Yeah.
Their stuff's legit.
Oops. Okay, let's get that back.
Watch out for companies that call themselves selling soundproof foam. If you see the word soundproof foam,
no such
run
thing.
away.
So if you look at these studs, you'll notice that they're not attached to the wall. They are physically separated from the wall on the base plate. The base plate is built in. In between the studs is insulation, which can be a variety of materials. This looks like fiberglass. Then across the studs, these are the hat channels that George mentioned, also known as resilient channels. So these are somewhat flexible, very lightweight aluminum channels that get attached to the studs. But behind the studs, this black material here, this is mass-loaded vinyl. This is really, really heavy stuff. It weighs like every square foot of it weighs 2 pounds. I mean, it's really, really limp. It has no structure whatsoever. So it can be challenging to put on, but what it does is it adds an incredible amount of mass to the wall, and it stops vibrations from being transmitted from the studs to the hat channels. So then on top of the hat channels, you attach your drywall, and sometimes you will attach 2 layers of drywall where the seams don't overlap each other. And then on top of that, you can put your sound absorption or reflection or diffusion materials on that. And now you have a completely isolated, soundproof, sound-conditioned wall structure. And then a ceiling that would go across the studs from each of the walls would look very similar to this.
That's great. Bill?
So when I built my studio, one of the things I did, let me see if I can get a picture of this up. There we go. I hope you guys can see it. It's a little dark, but if you'll look at the walls back there, none of them are parallel. And we spent a lot of time designing this so that there were no surfaces that might create standing waves. The funniest part of this was that when I went to find a carpenter to actually execute this, when my contractor did, he had the devil of a time finding somebody because, of course, carpenters these days like things like framing squares. They're all designed for 90-degree angles. And when I said there will be no 90-degree angles in this, he had to find an old semi-retired carpenter from up in northern Arizona who was the only guy who was willing to do it. And he came and he figured out all the angles on the back of an envelope as he was working, because literally he had no help from any of the normal tools. He had to figure it out and make it work. And it was fun watching that guy work.
Yeah, good. Courtney?
And if you're working in a production situation and there was a trend in Hollywood to build a lot of sound stages into warehouses with concrete walls, I would always have a talk with the construction crew before the sets went in to make sure that they didn't build them parallel to the concrete walls of the building and that they offset the set a few degrees off, and that that helped tremendously with the standing wave, and you could, before, if they didn't do that, you could try and have a conversation in the room, and you just couldn't hear anybody more than about 3 feet away because the echo was so bad.
It's funny, even
sound treatment.
Even the little box that I've built in my office is shifted 15 degrees, and it's the first comment everyone comes in. They go, "Hey, why didn't your box is crooked?" And I'm like, "It's not crooked. I did that on purpose. I did that. Like I shifted that all on my. I did that, Mickey."
And just going back to what Marty was saying earlier about having multiple layers of drywall that are staggered in terms of their placement. A lot of people use an adhesive design specifically for acoustic purposes. Several brands are like Quiet Glue or Green Glue, which are sort of rubberized adhesive materials that don't fully dry up and stay quite wet and rubbery, so that you have that layer of insulation between the layers of drywall.
It's a viscoelastic decoupling compound, and it transfers sound into heat.
That's great. Next question
comes from Jason Panks of Nashville, and he asked about tips or tools for isolating a bedroom or office door from the rest of the house, and does that affect the HVAC system?
Ooh, that's a really good point. So what happens in most residences, the return for the HVAC system is usually, let's just say you have a one-story home. Oftentimes it's just right in the center of the hallway or at the end of the hall. It's in the center of the home because it's cheaper and easier to build this way. And so it's relying on the airflow under your door. So the second you seal off the door to that room, this was my place as a prime example because the return is outside. If I was to seal off my door tight, and let's say everything else about the room is airtight, which it isn't, but that airflow would stop eventually. You basically, it's like filling a paper bag with air, and then you would lose your cooling and heating eventually. So yeah, it is a major consideration. Now, if you come and go regularly and exchange the air and keep the air flowing, it's not that big a deal. But if you're in there reading an audiobook for 4 hours, yes, it will stop cooling after 30 minutes or something. So it is a real problem.
Yeah, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, and in fact, in my voice booth, that's the first thing I had to do was plumb lines both in and out for some sort of airflow so that you can work a long project. And not only does it build up heat, but you just get stuffy. And I think it almost like you get too much carbon dioxide buildup.
That's
and
right.
It's unpleasant to be in.
Poison.
Next question.
Jason Panks of Nashville says, how to keep cool in summer, but not hear the fan or AC in a vocal mic.
Coming from someone in Nashville. It's a little. So what does it take, George, to do that?
Money.
Yeah.
Our favorite here in LA is using a mini split ductless HVAC system. You've probably seen them in offices or more commonly restaurants up on the wall. Big, wide, white unit usually. And those are great because the fan can spin very slowly. It's a very, very large squirrel cage fan cylinder. And it can spin rather slowly once it reaches temperature, putting out sometimes less than 18 dB of noise, SPL. And then the condenser unit, which is the noisier part, even then, those are pretty quiet. It can be put someplace else. $3,000 to $4,000 typical hardware installation for one of those. But if you got to record in Nashville and it's your livelihood, yeah, that's what you might want to consider.
Well, and then it's also how long are you going to need it? I mean, one of the things that we've done when we're really trying to get quiet is that we keep our studio when we're not shooting at 64 degrees. So like you just keep it close, and then we just turn them off. Like now, like we turn them off right before we go live. And we started getting it to the point in our last studio, we had it working, but we didn't install it. Being able to actually push a button on the ATEM switcher, it turns off the AC. Like when you just hit go, it turns the on-air button on air light goes on, AC goes off, everything, like all the lights go, like it is, okay, now we're ready. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Marty, and then Bill.
Yeah, mini split is an excellent choice. But if you need like really quiet, like if you're shooting Foley where you need absolute silence, a separate AC unit that is a another part of the building with some ductwork, and there's a lot of math to this, to what how many turns and how many degrees of angle but in the ductwork you need to get it very quiet as soon as it gets into the actual booth.
Marty?
Yeah, HVAC in a studio is a really tricky thing, and it takes really good contractors to follow directions. And the key is for quiet air movement, the key is massive volume and very low flow. Right? So anything that restricts the air, like a register or anything else, will create turbulence, which makes noise. So in larger studios like sound stages, you'll have massive ductwork with no grill on them at all, or very like chicken wire that doesn't restrict the airflow. And the air is moving very slowly. So you're moving large amounts of air very, very slowly.
And I will say, when you sit next to it, it's quite pleasing. Like I wish it all worked that way. It's like this pillow of air, just kind of like it just kind of moving past you. It's quite nice.
And you also want to try and reduce any vibrations from the air handler to the studio.
Yeah. Bill and then Stuart, pretty quick. We're going to move on to the next one.
Yeah, when I was doing it for the studio, so we had a mini split, about a 3-ton, 5-ton mini split. The part outside made most of the noise. The part inside did not. But even then, we put it in a little encapsulated room we built with the refrigerator for our snacks. And then inducting out there, we did 2 right turns before it got to the voice booth, and it was virtually silent. And in Arizona, it was such a pleasure to be able to have air conditioning constantly flowing in a voice booth where you're working for long periods. It was glorious.
It helps.
Yeah.
It helps. It's only really hot. Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Just something with those large metal ducts that are wonderful for moving great volumes of air slowly. When they heat up, they will heat up like a drum and let out the sound themselves. There's a really easy way to stop that sound from ruining your day, and that is to hang a large piece of carpet over the top of it, like just a rug thrown over the top, and it'll absorb the sound of the duct itself moving. You can also hang a piece of carpet vertically in front of where the outlet is, assuming the outlet's pointing downwards, and it will also slowly move and absorb some of the sound of the air movement. So carpet on ducts is actually pretty good.
Good. Courtney?
And one thing to keep in mind if you're setting up a system like Alex described, where it turns your AC on and off on a button on your console or something when you're rolling, when you short cycle a compressor on an AC unit, they'll quickly overheat and destroy themselves. Most of them have temperature sensors that avoid that, but then it won't ever have a chance to come on again because it has to take 3 or 4 minutes to equalize the pressure and the coolant inside. Otherwise, the compressor will overheat. So try not to short cycle them that much. Leave them off for a long period of time, then leave them on for a longer period of time if you can arrange that. But turning them on and off between each take is...
Well, we're not doing takes, we're doing shows. So it's like an hour and a half between each take.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But in Hollywood, where they're all on the red light switch, every take the red light comes on, every take the red light has to go off, and it has to shunt that on and off.
Right? Everybody be a VO buddy of mine who has an RV, and he thought it'd be a fun idea to go cross country and do all his VO from the RV. Well, this was done in the summertime, so his wife's job was to sit up at front and between every take, start the engine, try to get it tolerable, turn it off, do another take, start the engine, turn on the air conditioning. He's like, I'm never doing that ever again.
Yeah, we didn't notice it that much. It was mostly we get it really cold and then we do a show, and then we turn it back on again. We didn't have to do takes very often. Next question.
And Puit of San Francisco says, I have nice gear for recording and have minimal reverb, but man, my PC is loud. I've considered putting foam around my PC, but of course, I didn't want to screw up my PC's airflow. Thoughts? I'm so annoyed. Thank you.
Where do I know that name from? Aunt Pruitt. How's it going, Aunt? Yeah, don't choke your system, and then the more you try to stop the noise, the more the fans will run to try to keep breathing. So they're a real problem. A gaming PC is the opposite of what you want for a studio PC. I'm a bit of a Mac zealot like Alex, and I'm using an M1 Mac in front of me, which is running at 40% capacity right now, and it makes it zero sound. I can't tell that it's even on. It has there's a little bit of warmth on top, tiny, but modern chip design is getting pretty good thermally, and so I might consider that route instead. At $699, build just a dedicated audio machine. It's probably not a bad idea, but that is a challenge. I mean, silent PCs out there exist as well. There's like silentpc.com or something, and they have these really elaborate cases with huge heatsink fins that cool every aspect.
We had so I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but somebody at a big company got Elemental to build specific encoders for in the room encoding. And so the Elemental, the typical one use are like jet engines. Like they just turn on, they start howling. And these were HP 800, X800s or something like that were super quiet, but you can
Z800?
Z800, I'm sorry, not X800, Z800. So Z800s, and they were a great little encoder, big encoders, but they were specifically built so that you could put them in the room and not have it. I mean, we had a bunch of them because we would go into a conference room and have to stream from that conference room. But so yeah, it is a different fan structure. One of the things we've used also is the X-Rack Pros. These are not going to eliminate audio, but for our rack stuff, again, we've had stuff where we've had Elemental like 700s and 600s, which are jet engines when they turn on, streaming 20 rooms or whatever. You put them in this rack and it cuts 40, 50 dB, out of what's going on in the rack. I mean, it's intolerable without the rack. So it's another thing to think of. They're not cheap, but we've used them a lot, and they've been super effective at dropping, overall. But what I would, I agree with George though. The M1s as your studio doesn't get any quieter than that. Mickey and then Bill. Then we'll go back.
Yeah,
to
I would say like generally speaking, like work with physics, like get the computer further away, use quieter cooling solutions, quieter fans, quieter if you're doing liquid cooling, if there are any quieter motors to pull the liquid, go with those. Those rack cabinets are excellent. A lot of times we have those for studios where we need the racks in the room. But if you have the space and the flexibility, you might also want to consider putting the machine in a different room totally, and just getting your essentials, your display and keyboard and mouse in the room itself.
A lot of production facilities, it's just the keyboard, mouse, and monitor, and they're
have a machine
the machines
room.
themselves. The machines themselves, there's sometimes thousands of them in one place that they can manage. Bill, real quick.
Yeah, my old rig I had a G3 or something like that. I bought a Middle Atlantic cabinet that had low flow quiet fans on it. It made a lot of difference.
Yeah. Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville is up next with, I have a window AC unit that's mounted on the wall. I hear the birds outside and the rain hitting the metal of the unit itself. Any way to reduce the noise, even if temporary, while on Zoom or recording?
Yeah, I guess stop the rain from hitting the metal.
Yeah. To that point, one of the things that there's this stuff that they make at it's like coiled metal that they use for planting stuff. You can get it at the hardware store, and we actually put it one time on top of an entire metal roof, and it cut down. It just diffuses all the water before it hit the metal roof, and it was a relatively easy thing to do. The coolest thing I've ever seen is someone actually put grass on the roof. Like they planted grass on the roof, and it worked really well, and it looked really cool. And of course, they got some kind of LEED rating for it as well. Chris.
Yeah, in the East Village, New York City, the land of window units. I've seen people would just put like pieces of rug on top of their unit or a folded towel. You just have to affix it maybe during a dry day before it gets wet. But I'll bet you there's something at Home Depot that also sold, at least in my neighborhood, is sold specifically for that purpose. And I love the idea of the planter box, or just like little holders with plants and grasses and things like that.
Cool. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney, and then Mickey.
I had exactly the same problem in a window unit in my bedroom. The rain would drip down onto the top of it like a little drum, and I got some what I call frog cloth, which is used in evaporative coolers, which is that it's a hemp. It's about 2 inches thick, glued together, and it's coated with a waterproof coating so it doesn't mildew, because it's designed for using evaporative coolers to run water over to flow air through, and it breaks up the rain beautifully. And just put a layer of that on top of the.
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Greg, and then Martin.
I don't know if this is the same material that Courtney was talking about, but there's something called hog's hair, which is typically used for AC filtration.
Yeah, it's the same stuff except it's coated with a waterproof coating on it. Yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
And just building on the hog's hair is typically used on the outside of windshields on microphones when it's raining to break up the rain, so you don't hear that rain dripping on the mic. So it works very well. I think any fibrous, very, very loose fibrous material would do wonders.
Go ahead, Marty.
Just take into account that whatever you're putting on top of your air conditioner to break up the rain, if it's going to absorb water, it's going to add a lot of weight. So make sure your window air conditioner is properly supported from underneath, because you're going to be adding a lot of weight to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Keenan Campbell of Princeton, Illinois says, for home or makeshift Zoom studios, do you recommend adding acoustical panels or foam to help with echo? What else would you recommend to dress the room?
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I would. And this my room I'm using right now is not amazing, but it's done almost entirely with practical solutions. There is actually one proper panel right off camera over here, but if I want it to be more dead, I pull this curtain over this window. I open the closet doors on my clothing closet over here so that I'm exposing as much clothing to the outside instead of all door. I have a huge amount of scattering behind me in terms of clutter. We talked about this last week. Clutter is your friend. So, but acoustical panels that are made with like a rock wool layer inside are really, really effective. Bang for the buck. Blows foam out of the water, and when you wrap it with fabric, you can make it look really, really nice. It's cost effective. That's definitely my first choice. And then again, just a mixture. It's in a home. It's a mixture of practical stuff and studio specific stuff every time for me, usually.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, just to add to that, like definitely acoustic panels and mass is your friend. More mass will take care of lower frequencies. That's why panels are generally more effective than foam. And you can also, you can make panels very, very, you can design it very nice. There's a studio here that had a couple of artists like use fabric paint and drew nice murals on a bunch of panels and spread them out across a wall.
I think we talked about it. We had someone. I knew someone who printed them. You get someone to print on the fabric, and then you have these great designs as well. Go ahead, Chris.
Is it fair to say that if you're still in the furniture choosing process, if it's a new room, that you get like heavy upholstered furniture is better than the other alternatives? Like a big couch. I've got a big couch, like 7-foot couch right here to my right. So I feel like it helps the room,
Yeah, it's a giant bass trap too. It's going to absorb, because it's made of a lot of dense, heavy material and foam and things. It's going to suck up some of the low end in the room, and it's going to be a good part of the good addition to the space.
Next question.
Tommy Chance of St. Paul, Minnesota says, what are some solutions for noise coming through the roof? We've talked about some of those.
What are you dealing with, Tommy?
Yeah, like what types of noise? Helicopters, rain. It depends on the severity.
A little bit of everything. There are some low frequencies, I think, that are coming through that that raise a little havoc. Trains coming through. They're like 5 blocks away, but it sounds like Mass is going to have to. I'm going to have to deal with that, but I'm running on their schedule.
Yeah, and the other thing about low frequency stuff from a train is it's coming in everywhere. You think it's coming through the ceiling, you think it's coming in through a window, it's just coming in through everything. Basically, your entire building, the outside of your entire house is a mic, and the entire inside of your house is a speaker. And then the whole frame of the house is the wire, it's the transducer, So it's those high pressure sound waves find their way in. So it can be quite difficult. The lower the frequency, the more costly I think it is to stop it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the hard part is getting something like if it's just the ceiling or just the roof of something impacting it. Like metal roofs are particularly bad, but then it's just a matter of figuring out a way to diffuse it before it hits the roof. There's not really any way. What I found is if you have a metal roof, once it hits the roof, you're gonna hear it to some degree, unless you're gonna have really float the room out. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, and for those of you who just do this occasionally, I mean, often you can just wait until the noise goes away, the trains don't run or whatever. For those of us who do professional work and voiceover and things like that, one of the reasons we invest in things like standalone voice booths is because you don't have an option to not get the voiceover done in time for your client. So anything you can add that lets you eliminate problems and get the work done is a reasonable investment.
Then you have that unexpected 3 days of rain, and suddenly you can't record for 3 days, and that becomes an issue.
I call it quiet on demand.
Right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
The last one on today's session, Andrew Lipnick of San Francisco. Hi, Andy. For residential studios, says anyone on the panel used acoustic kits and/or room evaluation services from Prime Acoustics?
I know the company. They make a really nice product, and they are a Canadian company. So if you're in Canada, they're one of the best suppliers to get panels. I haven't used their tuning service. I have a little experience from other companies having done such a thing where they design the acoustic room for specific things, and just make sure they really do know how to tune a room for what you're doing. Because there's so many different kinds of things that we record. And I found that the one company I was working with, I will not name, woefully undertreated the room for the purposes of recording voiceover. And we had to do just completely redo it. So vet them a bit. But based on the quality of the products, the knowledge I've seen and what the design of the products, I feel pretty good about them. Another one I really feel good about is GIK Acoustics. Really good company. They're really knowledgeable. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I've used the kits from RLX as a starting off point, but it's definitely not like their pre-built kits that they sell they definitely will not get you 100% there. It always depends on the room.
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
And to hopefully help people dispel some of the occasional voodoo and pseudoscience that winds up in popular publications. In the Mukana chat, I added links to the Master Handbook of Acoustics by F. Alton Everest and Herman von Helmholtz's On the Sensations of Tone.
Ooh, that sounds good. Marty?
So so I worked with a voiceover artist who built a studio in his house, and he made the mistake of choosing an outside room. That is a room that is on the outside, has an exterior wall next to it. It also had a fairly low roof, and so he was getting all kinds of noise from outside. There was a room that he could have used. There was an interior room that had no outside walls and a much higher attic above the room that he could have put additional isolation in. So it was a lot of work. I had to take the siding off the house and put in specialized insulation and mass-loaded vinyl. I had to crawl up into a low attic and fill it with insulation. It was a lot of work, and that could have been very simply avoided. So choose your room properly when you're in a house. And whether you use a kit or not depends on how much noise there is coming in and what the nature of the room is.
So thinking starting a GoFundMe, I want to buy the On Sensations of Tone book from Herman Helmholtz, the hardcover edition. It's $987, but the paperback is $1885.
Wow. Does it come with, like
a hair sample?
It's a little like buying a Gutenberg Bible. That was probably the seminal original, and there are few left.
No, it's on Kindle for $13 on Amazon. There we go. You can get the hardcover. Okay, yeah, $18.85. Oh, 18. I thought you said 1885. I thought it was 1885.
Sorry.
Like I was like, wow. I was like, that's amazing. No, yeah, Kindle is where I usually put most of my books. So it's so that's $13.
Did we get through all the questions?
We did.
We did. 2 minutes
No question
early?
left. 2 minutes early. Great conversation. Thank you, everybody.
That's fun.
I love finding a subject like this. I mean, because I think that a lot of people saw this subject and were like, I don't know how they're going to talk about that for an hour. And that was easy. And now we're ready to have even another, like, get some of these get some of the folks that you had mentioned, George. We'll try to get Skip in, try to get some of the Grow at Reach, and do like a deeper dive into it and really dig into it, because now we're kind of primed.
I'm a practical, again, everything I do has been from experience and practical environments on very tight budgets, and Skip is my, the yin to my yang, where he's doing massive high budget builds with, tremendous amounts of math, so.
Well, what I love about that is that knowing that it's there. I think a lot of times when we get started in anything, like I remember like working with somebody on an event in probably 2007, 2008, and them talking about their Grass Valley cameras. And I'm like, well, my Sony X1 is still 1080p. It's still 1920 by 1080. It'll look just the same, blah, 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 blah. It was kind of absurd what I didn't know, and how much I thought I knew at the time. And so I think that the important thing for us is when we're building these, we choose to, in all of these things, I know a lot of times these discussions get pretty esoteric, but we choose to get what we can afford. We choose to get what we have time for, whatever is necessary. But we know that we know where we are in that food chain. That when we know what those things are, and we know maybe I'll consider a little bit of this. And I think that we've come a long way doing that. And sometimes we invest in it as well. Anyway, well, we're gonna now jump over to the post show. Thanks again. Thanks to George for joining us again on another day talking about this stuff. Thanks to all the audio folks, Mickey and Tim and Michael and Marty and Greg and TJ. Everyone here. It was a lot of thinkers, and Courtney, and I guess I just list everybody here because this is an audio panel. Again, this one and the education one have become these two, like it's dense. And the post show, by the way, if you guys are listening, is usually one of the post show on the Tuesdays is one of the densest days. So anyway, we'll see you guys in the post on the other side. Thanks, everybody.